Mr. Hageman, we just came from a reading of a play this afternoon, and we heard that you had some comments to say about the way that was presented.
The idea of the play, the idea of the book. The play was called Ocean and Teacup. It was actually named and drawn up after the copy of a book called Ocean and Teacup, which is more or less the story of a great Indian teacher named Sri Thakur Anukulchandra. And the musical is an attempt to embody the teachings of that teacher and the stories of some of the disciples and the way he taught them. And one of those disciples was myself. When I met Thakur in 1945, it was after the war, the Second World War, in which I had spent 2 years in Burma with the, as a member of the American Field Service, attached to different Indian Army infantry divisions, the 5th Division, the 17th Division, others.
Cut.
The point we want to get across in this musical is the issue of love, what it means when a spiritual teacher talks about love and expects anyone to learn to live by love. And during the years with Thakur, the first few years were inspiring and easy and loving, and in spite of all the problems. But there came a time when he told me the story of how his mother had treated him in childhood very demandingly and what we would call almost ruthlessly, cruelly. And though he had done everything for her and she became the leader of the religious movement, and he said she'd never praised him. And I said, Thakur, your mother never praised you in your life? He said, only once, and that was just before she left the world. She called me and said, you fulfilled all my hopes. And then she died, so I could never really enjoy it. And I felt very bad, and I said, boy, your mother was cruel. And he became very upset and said very intensely, you can think what you like or say what you like, but if my mother hadn't been the way she was, I couldn't have become what I am. And he said it was so intensely, I felt I'd overstepped my the bounds between a disciple and a guru, and I backed off. And then he suddenly looked at me and said, if I could behave this way with you, you'd quickly grow into a man. And not thinking, I said, of course, I'll go ahead and do it. After all, that's why I'm here. And he said, the problem is, there's one great problem. And I said, what? He said, you won't be able to handle it. You'll run away. And then I said, well, if I run away, I run away. I came to you to learn to become a man. And if I can't handle it, I can't handle it. What's the use of playing games? And that was the end of it. So then he said to me, nothing happened for about 2 weeks, and then suddenly one day when there was a big crowd around him, he suddenly said to me, hey, you wrecked this one Jeep, you drove it without oil? And I said, I wrecked the Jeep, I haven't touched the Jeep. And he said, Bhuvesh told me. I said, what do you listen to Bhuvesh for? If he complains because I taught a lot of people to drive and he felt his job is threatened. Thakur said, I will listen to Bhuvesh. And look, see, I hardly touch your ego, and look how it jumps. I saw Thakur, it will jump. When you use Bhuvesh, you can do anything you want, it won't bother me, but when you use Bhuvesh, that makes me bad. He said, I will use him, and if he doesn't complain, I'll put people behind you. So the drama began. The drama began in what he called becoming a man, but what I called in the long run learning to love without expectation. That's the fact. Anyway, the rest of the drama continued. A few months later, always in front of a large group, he suddenly called me, very gravely from behind the group, and said, hey, come up here. And when I came up, he said very loudly, you know what happens when you lie, don't you? And I was sort of shocked. And he said, you become irresponsible, you become unreliable, even your own thoughts you can't rely on to yourself, and so on. Anyway, the effect of that little comment publicly was that a rumor spread through the whole ashram that Hageman was a liar. Thakur had nailed him in the midst of a lie, and I lost many friends. Things went on peacefully for a long time until 3 or 4 months later, he suddenly called me, and he said, you know what happens when you're treacherous, don't you? So, again, the same thing started, and again, the same repercussions. And in the period of about 2 or 3 years, always publicly, always very strongly and intensely, Thakur had said to me, you know what happens when you're treacherous, you know what happens when you're a liar, you know what happens when you're a lecherous, you know what happens when you steal, you know what happens when you commit sodomy. Well, the last one sort of shook everything. By then I had no friends left in the ashram. No one wanted to talk to me except a handful of people. When I'd go to the tea shop, they'd move away from me. In fact, I was isolated. The only person I could stay with was Thakur. All through this, when we were alone together, he was very intimate, very loving, but publicly it would appear that I was a public enemy, and many people even thought of stories of driving me out of the ashram. And I just, I hung on because I felt, well, Thakur's testing me, let me see if I can go. But when he came to this issue of sodomy and so on, I went to him one night, and Thakur, I don't know why you're saying this. I never committed this sodomy in my life. And he said, well, maybe for you, it may be for someone else, it may be a warning, and left it at that. But no public explanation. Well, as these months, and actually it was several years went by, I had no friends left. I would go to the tea shop, people would move away and stop talking when I sat there. I'd come back to Thakur, and Thakur would say, where have you been? And I'd say, where have I got to go? You created such a situation here, there's nobody left that I can talk to. And he'd laugh. He didn't seem bothered at all. So I kept moving around with him. I'd fix his shoes, I'd stay by him, I'd take notes, I'd write up, translate stuff for him, do a lot of the local affairs that were in trouble for him. And then no one left to do, so I'd move around. When it was hot, I'd hold the umbrella over his head when we moved from place to place. And one day doing that, somebody said, you know, Thakur, staying with you, I'm becoming useless. And without breaking stride, he just said, then there's the possibility of you becoming useful. Now these were going on through many, many months. It got to a point where I felt and knew I had no one left in the ashram. No one left who was interested in me. In fact, most of them hated my guts. The only person I had left was Thakur, and I thought at times, this is a desperate situation, and I thought, let me see how far it goes, I'll hang on. Though I must admit at times it was like hanging on by your fingernails. Anyway, I stayed that way and held on, and through all sorts of circumstances, and one day I had achieved a very remarkable adjustment with some local people, and I thought, well, I'll tell Thakur this will make him happy. When I went to tell him, I could hardly get the words out of my mouth before he looked at me and said, you are so mean, so nasty, so petty. And I started to turn around and leave. He said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Renault. He said, sit down. So I sat down. And I waited until the conversations went on. He was talking with a lot of people from Assam, among them their big leader, who was a great devotee of Thakur and of Borda, mainly Borda. And they were all well dressed, and I was sort of in my broken down clothes, and I sneaked around in the back. My room was right next to Thakur, so I climbed through the window into my room, and I thought I have to do something. The only way, it's obvious Thakur doesn't understand that I'm doing a lot of good things here. If he could once appreciate that, he'd be a little more loving. So I went back to him and I said, Thakur, I have one question. When your mother was so nasty to you, did you ever feel that sometimes it'd be, if you went away, she'd miss you? She'd realize what you do? And he looked at me glanced at me, and there was a millionth of a second, a little twinkle in his eye, almost to remind me that this was a game, and then said, look, my mother was my existence. No matter what she did, love me or hate me, I couldn't leave my own existence. And that's the way it was